the expropriation without compensation law. Like they couldn't be more blunt. They're not hiding what they're doing. They're out to take land away from people without giving them any money.
Right. Well, that is exactly what passed Parliament. It's not in effect yet. They've decided to refer it to a committee for constitutional review, but they'll have to change the Constitution of South Africa, which has a property rights clause. And that property rights clause provides that you can only take property, or the government can only take property from people with compensation that approximates the kind of rule we have in the United States with eminent domain, and I'm sure in Canada as well. But land is a very emotive issue in South Africa because it was one of the symbols of racial discrimination and racial dispossession. And 100 years ago, the South African government essentially reserved something like 87% of the land for whites and left 13% for blacks. And blacks were and are the majority population. So there was a lot of resentment over that building up over the years. And there's been a lot of pressure on successive governments over the last 25 years since the end of apartheid to do something about it. Well, they have redistributed some land. The main problem is that their principle is willing buyer, willing seller, a basic market principle. And while there are some willing sellers, there aren't enough willing buyers. It turns out Black South Africans, although they're very upset about the land inequality, don't particularly want to farm. And so there's not a lot of interest in buying farmland. The government also doesn't have a lot of interest, or isn't showing a lot of interest, in supporting black farmers when they do decide to farm. So you've basically had this standstill, and a lot of the land that's been redistributed from white farmers primarily has gone to the state rather than to black farmers. What South Africa's wanted to avoid is a Zimbabwe-style situation where the president or the government decides to take land from white farmers to redistribute it to black people. Of course, the people who suffer most then are black people, not just because there are large numbers of black farm workers, but also because that tends to affect the country's food security. The commercial agricultural sector of the South African economy is huge, predominantly white, and produces the country's food and exports food, by the way. But that will quickly change if they start seizing those lands and giving them to people with no real history in farming, at least commercial farming. And that's what happened in Zimbabwe. So there are huge problems with this. It sends a terrible signal to investors right when South Africa looked like it might have a chance to turn the corner, replacing Jacob Zuma with the former businessman and labor organizer Cyril Ramaphosa, who is thought to be a reformist president, but now has thrown his weight behind this land without expropriation without compensation. And it's just tragic for South Africans because this was a huge chance, this new transition, the new president, was a huge chance for them to turn things around, and they appear to be blowing it.
That's an excerpt from my daily TV show, The Ezra Levant Show. Normally it's behind a paywall, but I thought you'd like this video, so we put it on YouTube. If you want to subscribe to watch the daily show every day, including always 2 interviews a day, and I read my hate mail,